My name is Orrin Caldwell. I'm 40 years old, and for the past 15 years I've built what most people would call a successful business empire. I own a family construction company based out of Denver, Colorado, specializing in commercial real estate development. We've put up office buildings, shopping centers, and luxury condominiums across the Rocky Mountain region. The business has been good to me, very good in fact. Nearly 2 years ago, I thought I'd found something even more valuable than financial success. The woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Her name was Delphine Hayes, 36 years old, with the kind of sharp intelligence that initially attracted me to her. She worked in marketing for a tech startup downtown, and we met at a charity gala for the Denver Children's Hospital. She was elegant, well-spoken, and seemed to genuinely appreciate the work ethic that had gotten me where I was. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. Delphine moved in with me after about 6 months of dating. My house in Cherry Hills Village had plenty of space, and honestly, I enjoyed the company. She fit seamlessly into my routine. We'd have coffee together in the mornings before I headed to job sites, and she'd often have dinner waiting when I got home. Weekend trips to Aspen, evenings at the Denver Art Museum, dinner parties with my business associates. She handled it all with grace. As our relationship deepened, I began including her in aspects of my business that I'd never shared with anyone outside my immediate family. I'm talking about financial planning sessions with my accountant, meetings with my lawyer Richard Vance about property acquisitions, even some of the day-to-day administrative decisions that keep a construction company running smoothly. Looking back, I realize I was probably trying to prove how serious I was about our future together. I gave her access to my home office, where I kept most of my important documents. I added her as an authorized user on one of my business credit cards. I even brought her to a few meetings with potential investors, introducing her as my fiancée and future business partner. The engagement ring had cost me $47,000, a 2-carat diamond from Tiffany & Co. that she'd admired during a trip to New York. After living together for about 12 months, I proposed, and she said yes. We were planning a wedding for the following spring at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. The guest list was approaching 300 people. Delphine had already picked out her dress, a stunning creation from a boutique in Cherry Creek that cost more than most people's cars. I was happy to pay for it all. When you love someone, money becomes just a tool to make them happy. But then, about 4 months ago, I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. The first red flag was subtle, the kind of thing that most people would dismiss as a simple mistake. I was reviewing monthly statements from First National Bank of Colorado when I noticed a wire transfer for $12,000 that I didn't remember authorizing. The transaction was legitimate, properly documented, but it was for a consulting fee to a company called Apex Development Solutions that I'd never heard of. When I asked Delphine about it over dinner that night, she barely looked up from her grilled salmon. "Oh, that's the firm handling the environmental impact study for the Morrison project," she said casually. "You approved it last week, remember? You were on that conference call with the city planning department." I did remember the call, and I remembered discussing the need for an environmental study. But I also remembered deciding to use Colorado Environmental Consulting, the firm we'd worked with for years. I didn't say anything that night, but I made a mental note to follow up. 2 weeks after discovering the first red flag, another discrepancy came to light. This time it was a contract amendment for our biggest current project, a mixed-use development in downtown Denver worth nearly $4 million. The amendment changed the profit-sharing structure with our primary investor, reducing our company's take by almost $200,000. The document bore my signature, but I had no memory of signing it. "Honey, you were exhausted that day," Delphine explained when I brought it up. "You'd been at the Thornton site since 5 in the morning dealing with that concrete delivery problem. I brought the papers to you around 9 p.m., and you signed them while you were half asleep watching SportsCenter." Her explanation made sense. I had been working brutal hours that week, and I did tend to sign documents without reading them thoroughly when I was tired. But something about her tone bothered me. There was a confidence in her voice, almost like she'd been rehearsing the explanation. The third incident, which occurred 3 weeks after the contract amendment issue, was what made me realize I wasn't dealing with simple mistakes or my own forgetfulness. I discovered that someone had accessed my safe, the fireproof Mosler safe in my home office where I kept backup copies of all major contracts, property deeds, and insurance policies. The safe's electronic lock keeps a digital log of every time it's opened, and according to the records, it had been accessed 6 times in the past 2 months while I was at construction sites. Only 3 people knew the combination: myself, my attorney Richard Vance, and Delphine. I'd given her the code 9 months earlier after she'd complained about not being able to access important documents when I wasn't home. "What if there's an emergency?" she'd asked. "What if I need to get to our insurance papers or the deed to the house?" It had seemed reasonable at the time. I didn't confront her immediately. 15 years in construction had taught me that when something doesn't feel right, you don't tear down the whole structure until you know exactly where the problem is. Instead, I decided to conduct my own investigation. I started by calling Colorado Environmental Consulting, the firm I thought we'd hired for the Morrison Project environmental study. "Mr. Caldwell," said Janet, their office manager, "we never received a contract for that project. We were expecting your call, but when we didn't hear back, we assumed you'd gone with another firm." Next, I reviewed the contract amendment that had cost us $200,000. I compared the signature to documents I knew I'd signed personally. The handwriting was close, very close. But there were subtle differences in the way certain letters were formed. Someone had practiced my signature and they'd gotten quite good at it. But the real smoking gun came when I decided to install a hidden security camera in my home office. It was a small device, no bigger than a USB drive, that I positioned behind a picture frame on the bookshelf. The camera had motion activation and could record continuously, uploading footage to a secure cloud server. What I discovered 5 days later made my blood run cold. The footage showed Delphine entering my office at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, when she thought I was at a job site in Boulder. She went straight to the safe, entered the combination without hesitation, and removed a thick folder containing property deeds. But she didn't just look at them. She photographed every single page with her iPhone, taking care to ensure each image was clear and properly lit. Then she did something that made my stomach drop. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began practicing my signature, using a contract from the folder as a reference. She filled an entire page with Orrin Caldwell, written in various styles, getting closer and closer to my actual handwriting with each attempt. The final piece of evidence came when she made a phone call. The camera's audio wasn't perfect, but I could make out enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. "Landon, it's me," she said. "I've got all the documentation we need. The Cherry Creek property is worth $850,000, just like the appraisal said. Once I get his signature on the transfer documents, Apex Development can complete the purchase, and we can move forward with our plan." There was a pause as she listened to the other person. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. He trusts me completely. The poor fool actually thinks we're getting married in the spring." That's when I realized that the woman I loved, the woman I'd planned to spend my life with, was systematically stealing from me. The Cherry Creek property she'd mentioned was a piece of commercial real estate I'd purchased 4 years earlier as an investment. It housed a small strip mall with a coffee shop, a yoga studio, and a boutique clothing store. The location was prime, just 2 blocks from the Cherry Creek shopping center, and the property had appreciated significantly since I'd bought it. $850,000 was exactly what my insurance company had appraised it for 9 months earlier. I sat in my office that night, staring at the camera footage on my laptop screen, replaying that phone conversation over and over. The casual cruelty in her voice when she called me the poor fool hit harder than the financial betrayal. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or a moment of weakness. This was a calculated long-term con game, and I'd been the perfect mark. The next morning I called my attorney, Richard Vance. We'd worked together for over a decade, and he'd handled everything from construction contracts to the purchase of my house. If anyone could help me navigate this situation, it was Richard. "Orrin, what you're describing sounds like wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft," he said after I'd explained everything. "We're talking about federal crimes here. The FBI's Economic Crime Unit handles cases like this. I don't want to involve law enforcement yet," I told him. "I need to know the full extent of what she's planning before we make any moves. If we tip our hand too early, She might destroy evidence or disappear. Richard understood. What do you want to do? I want to let her think she's winning, I said. Let her dig herself deeper while we build an airtight case. Over the next 3 weeks, I played the role of the unsuspecting fiancé while Richard worked behind the scenes. We hired a private investigator named Marcus Torres, a former Denver police detective who specialized in financial crimes. Marcus's job was to research Landon Croft, the man Delphine had been talking to on the phone. What Marcus discovered was disturbing. Landon Croft was 35 years old, with a history of real estate fraud dating back to 2018. He'd been arrested twice in California for running shell companies that existed solely to launder stolen property. Apex Development Solutions, the company that had received my $12,000 consulting fee, was registered to an address in Aurora that turned out to be a UPS store mailbox. But the most shocking revelation came when Marcus ran a comprehensive background check on Delphine herself. Her real name was Diane Henderson, and she was wanted on probation violations in Arizona for a previous real estate fraud conviction. The woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I'd planned to marry, was a career criminal who had been using a false identity for over 2 years. While Marcus was uncovering Delphine's true identity, Richard was working with a forensic accountant to trace all the suspicious financial transactions. We discovered that the Apex Development Solutions payments weren't limited to that initial $12,000. Over the past 9 months, almost $73,000 had been transferred from various business accounts to companies that didn't exist or were registered to fake addresses. But the real bombshell came when Richard's contacts at the county recorder's office alerted us to unusual activity involving my property deeds. Someone had been making inquiries about transferring ownership of the Cherry Creek property, asking about the specific documentation that would be required and the timeframes involved. She's not just planning to steal money, Richard explained. She's planning to steal the entire property. Based on what we're seeing, I think she's going to forge your signature on a deed transfer, sell the property to Apex Development Solutions at below market value, and then Landon Croft will flip it for the full $850,000. They'll split the profits and disappear. The audacity of it was breathtaking. This wasn't a simple case of someone stealing from petty cash or skimming money from business accounts. This was an elaborate multi-month operation designed to steal nearly $1 million in real estate. When do you think she'll make her move? I asked. Soon, Richard said. These types of operations have a limited window. The longer they wait, the more likely they are to get caught. My guess is she'll try to complete the property transfer within the next week or 2. That night, I went home and acted like nothing had changed. Delphine was in the kitchen, preparing dinner and talking about wedding plans. She'd been to the florist that day and was excited about the centerpiece arrangements she'd selected. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was planning a wedding that would never happen while simultaneously planning to rob me blind. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, kissing me on the cheek as I walked through the door. Same as always, I replied. Just trying to keep all the projects on schedule. But inside I was counting down the days until she would finally reveal her true intentions. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for her to walk into it. I didn't have to wait long. 1 week later, Delphine told me she had a surprise for me. She'd arranged for us to meet with a real estate attorney to discuss optimizing our property holdings for tax purposes before the wedding. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon at a law office in downtown Denver. It's just some paperwork, she said with that same practiced smile I'd fallen in love with 2 years earlier. Nothing major, but it could save us thousands in capital gains taxes down the road. I agreed to attend the meeting, but I also made sure Richard would be ready to spring our trap. We'd spent the previous 3 weeks preparing all the necessary legal documents, restraining orders, asset freezes, and criminal complaints. The Denver Police Department's Economic Crime Unit was standing by, waiting for my signal. Friday arrived gray and cold, typical November weather in Colorado. The law office was in a high-rise building on 17th Street, with a view of the Rocky Mountains that would have been impressive under different circumstances. The attorney, a thin man in his 50s named Gerald Morrison, looked nervous when he shook my hand. "Mr. Caldwell, thank you for coming," he said. "Ms. Hayes has explained the situation, and I believe we can handle everything quite efficiently." Delphine was dressed in her best business suit, playing the role of the concerned fiancée to perfection. She'd brought a leather briefcase and several manila folders, looking every inch the successful professional I'd thought she was when we first met. "Honey, you'll just need to sign a few documents," she said, opening one of the folders. "It's mostly technical stuff about property classification and tax designation." I looked at the papers she placed in front of me. To most people, they would have appeared to be legitimate tax documents filled with legal jargon about beneficial ownership restructuring and tax advantage transfers. But I'd seen enough real estate contracts to recognize what they actually were. Deed transfer documents that would sign over ownership of my Cherry Creek property to Apex Development Solutions for the bargain price of $1. "This is interesting," I said, pretending to study the documents. "Can you walk me through exactly what this accomplishes?" Delphine's explanation was smooth and well-rehearsed. She talked about creating shell companies to minimize tax liability, about the benefits of transferring assets between related entities, about how this would protect our wealth after we were married. If I hadn't known what she was really planning, I might have been impressed by her knowledge of real estate law. "Where do I sign?" I asked. The relief in her eyes was unmistakable. After months of planning and preparation, she thought she'd finally succeeded. Gerald Morrison, who was clearly being paid to facilitate this fraud, pointed to the signature lines on each document. I picked up the pen, looked at Delphine one last time, and said, "You know, before I sign anything this important, I always like to have my attorney review it. That's when I pulled out my phone and sent a simple text message to Richard. Now. 5 minutes later, the conference room door opened and Richard walked in, followed by Detective Sarah Kim from the Denver Police Economic Crime Unit and FBI Special Agent Michael Rodriguez. The look on Delphine's face was something I'll never forget. A mixture of shock, rage, and the dawning realization that her carefully constructed plan had just collapsed. "Diane Henderson," Detective Kim said, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit theft, and violation of your probation terms in Arizona." Gerald Morrison immediately started claiming he'd been deceived, that he had no idea the documents were fraudulent. Agent Rodriguez informed him that his cooperation would be noted, but that he'd still need to answer questions about his role in the scheme. As for Delphine, or Diane as I now knew her real name to be, she tried one last manipulation. "Oren, please," she said as the handcuffs clicked into place. "You don't understand. Landon was blackmailing me. He had compromising photos from when we were involved years ago. I never wanted to hurt you, but I was done listening to her lies." The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. The evidence we'd gathered was overwhelming. Recorded phone conversations, forged signatures, financial records showing the fraudulent transfers, and testimony from Marcus Torres about her criminal history and false identity. Landon Croft was arrested 2 days later at his apartment in Aurora, where police found additional forged documents and evidence of other real estate scams he'd been planning. Diane pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution for the money she'd stolen. Her probation from the Arizona conviction was revoked, adding another year to her sentence. Landon wasn't as smart. He tried to fight the charges and ended up with 7 years in federal prison plus additional time for the California cases that had been reopened, based on evidence found during his arrest. As for Gerald Morrison, he lost his law license and received 2 years probation for his role in the scheme. The Cherry Creek property, of course, remained safely in my name. In fact, its value has increased to over $900,000 since then, making Diane's attempted theft even more costly. I never did get married that spring. Instead, I took a month-long vacation to New Zealand, something I'd been putting off for years because of work. It was exactly what I needed to clear my head and process everything that had happened. These days, I'm more cautious about who I trust with access to my business and my personal life. I still date, but I make sure to run background checks, something I should have done from the beginning. Richard jokes that I've become paranoid, but I prefer to think of it as being appropriately careful. The experience taught me that no amount of love or trust should blind you to red flags. When something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And when someone betrays your trust on this level, the best revenge isn't anger or violence. It's simply making sure they face the full consequences of their actions through the legal system. Diane Henderson thought she could steal nearly $1 million from me and disappear into a new life built on my money. Instead, she's spending the next 5 years in federal prison, and her criminal record will follow her for the rest of her life. Sometimes justice really is the sweetest revenge of all. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.